Okay. Thank you all for joining today. For any newcomers, these are our What Works Cities office hours, which is our regular webinar series for a community of cities. And we're really looking forward to this conversation today. We have Mark Head, who is moderating, the former Chief Data Officer of Philadelphia. And then we've got some folks representing 3 of our cities within our community. Derek from Gilbert, Jason from San Francisco, and then we have Carrie and Brad from Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm going to hand off the virtual mic in a second to Mark, but as usual, we have just a couple of housekeeping items. So remember, first of all, to put yourself on mute. There's going to be a Q&A towards the end of this meeting, so you can feel free to join us on audio then or enter any questions throughout and at the very end in our chat box function if you are joining us from a computer. And then last thing is that this webinar is being recorded, and we're going to share both the webinar and the presentation live on our website and on Slack starting tomorrow. So we'll share the link for that at the end of this presentation as well. And at that, I'm going to pass off to Mark and all of our presenters, and thank you all again for joining us.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this office hours because so I was the Chief Data Officer in the city of Philadelphia from 2012 through 2014, and I would say before, during, and after my time there, the question that I got the most to this day is how do we get started with an open data program? So if you have asked that question before, or if you're going to ask it during this office hours, you're in good company. It's a very common question, and we have with us a group of people that are going to be able to speak to this in great detail. So Brad and Carrie are going to start us off. We're going to do 5 to 7 minute sessions where they'll describe what they're doing, and then we're going to open it up to questions and have a good discussion about how to get started on your open data program. So with that, I'm going to ask Brad and Carrie to introduce themselves and get started.
Hi, my name is Brad Hardig, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at the City of Scottsdale.
And I'm Carrie Johnson, and I am the Business Intelligence Manager for the City of Scottsdale.
I'd first like to start by kind of thanking What Works Cities for hosting this webinar, and also Mark for moderating the discussion. I think there's a lot of good material that we're going to go over today that should be able to help you jumpstart your efforts. So for starting, we really wanted to create a process that was easy to follow and would create the organizational buy-in that's needed for this to sustain. And in doing so, we felt as though we needed to start pretty much from the top. So we talked to the city manager and to the mayor and got their buy-in associated with this. And we created a council resolution that was formally adopted by our council. This was then followed up with an administrative regulation. So basically, we have in the city a number of administrative regulations, but they're basically the rules that staff must follow and or live by. So taking it down a notch, we identified data coordinators and departmental coordinators from within a few key departments at first within the city, just so that we could get our process down and kind of solidified. We developed a coordinator's guide and a training guide, and that also was something that we used to, we had to kind of pilot it to make sure that we had something that was going to work. We did get a lot of extra help from the Sunlight Foundation and from GovX, so Alyssa Doom and Matt Rathman, big shout out to them because it really helped jumpstart our efforts. We developed an inventory or a inventory template, and that was to create consistency in the data collection process. Then we developed a publishing workflow and an approval template. So it basically goes from the coordinator to the department head to the attorneys, actually to the open data lead, and then to an open data leadership team, which is all pretty much department heads from within the city. So we took a very high-level approach to this to make sure we'd have good buy-in on it. Next slide.
Okay, so while all of this was going on and we were creating all of these processes and for people to We also realized somehow we have to present this to the public, but there was no budget for it. And I came in a little bit, I wouldn't say towards the middle, but after it started, at which point I don't think anyone had really thought about budget for it, or that we were really, even at that point, it was kind of like, oh, hey, we did these things and we're ahead of ourselves. We're ready to get this to. I spent just a lot of time researching costs and determining what could we even do, and settled on CCAN because it is open source and so many other places use it, other countries. And there is actually a lot of GitHub on how to use it, how to install it, what things don't work well in it, what you should do in other ways, and they do try to add new things onto it. Recently, they added a way to check your data, which I think is great. You know, you can automate checking the data and send it out to the people that need to janitorialize their data. Even though we kind of settled on CCAN after talking about it as a group and realizing what our cost implications were, we did go to the GIS team and talk to them about Esri, because, you know, we do use ArcGIS and have Esri, but after they looked at what our goals were and what they were already doing with it, they didn't think it was a good fit. Although we do pull data using CCAN, we automatically pull data every day from the Esri site, because there is an API and they link together very, very well. We put this at the beginning, we put it on a Windows server, and we just booted up one virtual server, and we're serving the website and the data to the public off of that same server. It's grown enough where that it's, you know, we'll have to speed it up, but for getting started, for what we were doing, it has not been extremely difficult. You know, I've had other people in my department and other departments kind of get dropped in and, hey, can you put a new theme on this so it looks like City of Scottsdale? I'm going to be on vacation. Can you add a couple of data sets? And they've been able to pick it up. We, in the future, imagine all the data coordinators, they will be putting their own data out, and I won't be doing all of the work on it anymore. So I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, determining data sets. That was also lots of Googling fun. And what I did there really was kind of looked at the presence that already existed, same as for picking the open data platform. We did have a small, very small existing presence that was on a regular Windows web server that was OData. We looked at it and said, is anyone asking for any of the data sets that were, I think there were about 5 in total. Does anyone ask for them continually? And there were 3 that people did ask for frequently. So we just went ahead and reused them. They were already automated. Didn't have to do any work besides switch what server it was pointing to. We kind of poked around and felt at the public records requests and asked people what they were getting most requests for, and then also looked at the top 10 U.S. city open data census. So those weren't really requests. That was, I don't know if everyone knows what the city open data census is, but you go on there and say what data you have out there. So the data that the most cities had is also what we looked at. And then really we just went to who else is in what work city and has their portal up. So Mesa was actually one that had their portal up at that time, and we looked at it. San Francisco, Colorado Springs, just any of them I could easily find and see what across the board they all had published. The other question we asked ourselves was, could it be used both internally and externally, meaning could some of this data be shared between departments, where some of our finance data is used by Fire. Fire's data is out there on the open data portal. We do have some finance data. It's labeled private for now, but the fire department could look at their risks based on, what truck was out at what time and things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we could foster the use of it and foster de-siloing data internally. Okay.
Next slide.
Next.
And the one thing I'd just like to emphasize as we're switching slides is this, those of you who have not done this before, there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of people that have done this, and everybody's very collaborative. I mean, it's open. We're all sharing our same information. So my first slide, if there's anything after this that any of you would want, I can put them all together and ship it off and share it. But it is definitely a very collaborative process and group of people to work with. So we, as far as publicizing the launch of our open data portal, we did our standard news releases, web posts, social media shares, but we also did what we felt were a few unique things that could be other opportunities for other cities to possibly follow the lead on, and I think they were fairly successful. So in February, leading up to Open Data Day, we basically did the hashtag Scottsdale 28, so 28 days of data sets. Now, this wasn't necessarily all on our portal, but it was the wide variety of information that we have as a city, both on our website and on our portal, and we put up a different data set every day up on Twitter and Facebook. And that campaign, it earned over 100,000 impressions, so basically views with thousands of clicks. So we felt that that was a very successful campaign. We also participated in a town hall that What Works City put on, and it was a live event that we were able to take questions from folks and be able to answer it, and that also seemed to be a very successful process and day. And then coming up, we have what's called a progressive data day, and what we're doing is we're taking all the departmental coordinators and we're going to bring them together under one meeting, and we're also using a concept of N+1. So basically a coordinator plus someone else in the city who's interested in the use of data. And what we're really trying to do is just from the bottom up, foster and grow the use of data and evidence-based decision making. And at that Progressive Data Day, we're going to talk about what is open data and why the city's interested in using it, discuss our portal usage statistics and what the most popular data sets are. And then from there, we're going to break out and we're going to say, what do we currently have on our portal in all our areas, and what can we share with each other? So we're going to break out into different groups and kind of talk about this. We're going to have the blue sticky board and put up different themes. From there, we're going to look at what problems do we want to try to solve with the data, and if we don't have the data, can we get it and identify those so then we can solve the problems. And I think most importantly, we want to be able to measure our overall success of the program. So I think two things that we've talked about is the increase of the overall data sets that are out there, both internally and externally, and also breaking down the silos, because very often cities will have data, but they're between two different departments, and you're really not able to get that from the other department as easily as you would like. So that is Scottsdale's.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Brad and Carrie. We're going to turn it over next to Derek from Gilbert. And for folks listening, if you're not already, start thinking of questions and things that you want to ask these speakers. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Derek.
All right. Hey, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So in Gilbert, we took actually not too different of an approach. It was kind of similar. But here in Gilbert, we started with open data probably back in 2012, 2013, unofficially, with a program that we have called Spark App League. And Spark, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a program that we run that teaches high school and junior high students how to code, and we give them data, town data, for their apps and games. So every event that we throw has a theme that goes around it. So when we would choose a theme, we would give students data sets that were related to that theme. So just as an example, a couple of years ago, we did water conservation as the theme for Earth Day. So we provided, water consumption, water production data. We put an open data portal out there in Junar, but the big issue then was that we weren't updating the data sets regularly. We were basically preparing this data for our events, and then that was it. So a few, maybe I want to say years ago then, our IT department, we kind of piggybacked with each other because as we were looking for these data sets for Spark, our IT department was doing a data inventory for kind of cybersecurity measures. We wanted to see where all the data was in the town, what software systems we were using, and how we were securing that stuff. And just kind of through that process, we got involved in What Works Cities. And so What Works Cities kind of helped us formalize the things that we kind of were doing, but we didn't really know what we were doing. So we basically formalized all this stuff into an administrative procedure and really just got those best practices from the Sunlight Foundation, from all the What Works Cities people, from the people in Scottsdale and Mesa and everybody else that was working on this open data program at the same time. So through that, we kind of formalized an administrative procedure that our organization uses. We created an open data guidebook that kind of lays out the entire process of where data lives and then how it gets to where it is. And we, like I said, we pretty much formalized what we were doing already. So then we kind of moved on to the actual implementation of this. What would this look like outside of Junar, which was our open data platform that we were using before? And the main issue that we ran into was that we had just planned on continuing to use Junar as our platform, but unfortunately, they realized that a lot of municipalities were now trying to get into this space. So as is par for the course, they bumped up the price pretty considerably. And we didn't have any budgets or money for open data, kind of like what Scottsdale was saying. We really just kind of had to leverage what we were already using, which is, story of our life in government. But so we started the search for a new platform. We met with some other open data providers and tried to see, what would integrate best with what we were already doing. So we met with OpenGov, we met with Junar again, and unfortunately, by the time we actually got into the RFP kind of purchasing process, we found out that the costs that everybody was asking for, there was just no way we were going to get those approved. So we did kind of like what Scottsdale did. We looked at open source solutions, and then again, by the time we figured out how much it would cost to deploy a server and set up something like CCAN on there and then have people, learn how to use it and everything, it didn't really work out. So as much as possible, and this is kind of a common thread that you'll just hear throughout our entire open data experiences, we just tried to use what we already had. We tried to work in with what we already had. We were already using ArcGIS and ArcGIS Hub for all of the mapping and spatial tools in our GIS department. So we already had data that was loaded onto the platform. It wasn't the open data that I think most people are used to, the tabular data, but really all of your GIS people are kind of already open data experts. They've been sharing mapping data and spatial data for years and years and years. So it just made sense that if we already had this kind of pool of people that had experience with that platform, that we could leverage that and use it. So the other thing was, in addition to bringing in these ArcGIS users that we already had, we wanted to make sure that whatever we used integrated with everybody's workflow already. We didn't want to create more work for our staff and our employees. One of the things that you'll see on our open data portal is that we did a comparison of our number of employees to the number of employees that other municipalities have in kind of the same population range, and we're actually just in general like the 6th smallest government organization in the country. There's only a couple organizations in the nation that have a higher resident to employee ratio. So it was really, really important for us to make sure that we could integrate it into things that people were already doing. So from there, we took that data inventory that we had done for security and kind of piggybacked off of that. We took every single data set that we had and then basically ranked it with the help of some of the best practices of other cities, and just looked at what data sets are most useful for residents and for our internal customers, our staff, because a big goal of this was to make sure that staff could share information from department to department that wasn't necessarily being shared currently, and then what was private and sensitive information. So by determining usefulness, we basically looked at what's useful for internal people, what would the community find useful, and then more importantly, are there any data sets that both would find useful? And then another thing that we looked at was, what's the actual level of making it available? Not just how easy is it to access this stuff, but how do we automate the process of updating that data? Because outdated data isn't any more useful, if people can't get current information. How much effort does it take for our departments that are producing this data to verify it, to make sure that it's being updated? And then more importantly, as I said before, how do we put it into their existing workflow so that it doesn't change things? If a lot of our people are actually managing their data in spreadsheets. So we literally, from kind of the ground up, had to figure out a way for them to upload their spreadsheets to our intranet in SharePoint, and then have that kind of automatically connect to the Esri piece, so that when our people are done with their work, all they have to do is upload their file, and then we take over from there, and the whole process is automated. Now we're getting really, as we're going through data sets, we try to publish 2 new data sets every month, and we're getting really good at kind of this process of creating spreadsheets for people that they can just copy and paste the data from their existing spreadsheets that they're using. And then that formats everything into the format that we need to put it on the open data portal. So then they can just copy and paste it into our intranet site that we created for each department. And then boom, our automation workflows, happen at the end of each month, and publish all the data for people. From there, then it's a matter of how do we engage our residents. So Gilbert is really unique in that 96% of our population of residents are data scientists. So we have a lot of people that just innately, can look at this data and know exactly what to do with it. Next bullet point. Totally kidding. We do not have data scientists in Gilbert. I mean, we might have a couple, but our population is probably just like most municipalities. It's not just entirely, a bunch of data scientists. So we knew that we, like Scottsdale, have an open data committee that we set up to kind of work through our policy. And one of the things that we found was that a huge issue for departments was trusting government. Some people were worried about putting data out there and then having residents think that we were trying to promote propaganda if we wrote like stories or if we interpreted the data for residents. But then other people were worried about, well, if we don't offer any kind of interpretation or any kind of context for these data sets, then what that means is that it would really raise the barrier of entry for people that had no experience with data. So how do you engage residents without giving them some kind of context if they don't already know what they're looking at? And then again, how do we use what we already have to do that? And so we did that by essentially making it a part of our organization. We decided to launch our open data portal in kind of a split format. So what that means is that data that our data owners are creating is part of their workflow. We went to every single department, and when we looked at the data inventory, we basically created those processes for people so that their data sets just immediately, if they're already working on a strategic initiative or if they're working on a project, we want them thinking about the data that they're already looking at, and then those data sets are then prioritized to put out there. And then on top of that, we have a separate site, which is our little mascot here, Alex, which Alex is our data avatar that we use in Gilbert. And essentially, we offer that context on a completely separate website so that people who only care about the data and don't want our interpretations can go to our data-driven website. And people who aren't data scientists and need that context or need visualizations or need additional information surrounding that, they can go to Alex and get that information. So if you go to data.gilbertaz.gov, you can see our raw data. If you go to alex.gilbertaz.gov, you can see that. And Alex is kind of cool because our plan, and we're just starting this process with her, but our plan for Alex is literally for her to be our data avatar. So if we have public meetings that we're posting announcements for, or if our council is going to be making making a decision. Because we have staff that are working on those data sets, we're going to publish those data sets before those meetings come up and before those decisions get made. And if any of our residents see Alex out in the community on signs or newsletters or on our website somewhere, that means that we have data that goes along with whatever that meeting is or whatever that strategy is that they can look at. And if they want to, we offer that context for them. We offer visualizations for that data. So all of that kind of goes hand in hand to make sure that we're not just putting that data out there and then letting it sit and leaving it for no purpose. We're engaging residents. We're using it still for Spark App League that I mentioned at the beginning. Our students are going to be using that data for our competitions again going forward. And then just a couple other things that I didn't mention on the slides, but I also run the free code camp here in Gilbert, which I think is a cool program for a lot of people to get involved in, because it's basically kind of a coding camp, an online boot camp that people can sign up for. And the final project, in order to be able to graduate from this boot camp, which as the name implies, is completely free. There's no charge for it. But the final project that you have to do is you have to volunteer to do work on a nonprofit or government, like a volunteer basis website. So by running and being a moderator and a lead on Free Code Camp, I can encourage people that are going through this to choose Gilbert as their project, and then we can work on stuff. So with Alex, we're already working on like an Alexa skill so that people can get little facts and data tidbits from Alex, or we'll have a Siri integration that our free code camp people are going to work with, or maybe it'll be a small business portal or something that pulls our data from the website. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can kind of engage and leverage partnerships. And then kind of the last thing I just wanted to say is that I think one of the things that's unique about Gilbert is a lot of municipalities, and I don't know that we're completely unique in this, but I see that in most municipalities, the open data portal kind of lives in the IT department because it's a computer thing, it's a data thing, and your IT teams are typically your specialists on it. Here in Gilbert, it lives with our Office of Digital Government, which is kind of like our communications team. So even though we leverage our IT team to make the background processes work, our front-facing, our engagement piece happens entirely in our Office of Digital Government. It happens through our communications. So I think that getting people to engage with it and use it, it's really important that you have your communications and marketing teams involved in that. Otherwise, it may not go anywhere. So in terms of that, that's kind of our journey that we took. And, as Mark said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or email us or whatever. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Next, we're going to move to Jason Lally from San Francisco. Jason, take it away.
Hi. Yeah, hope you can hear me. This is Jason Lally, a data service manager with Data SF. And myself and Joy Bonaguro, the chief data officer, and the rest of our team came in actually after the program had already set up. So I want to just sort of reflect on some of the phases of open data that we saw basically looking backward on our program. So first phase, and these phases were developed early on by Joy when she first came in, because she wanted to communicate internally with our stakeholders about what has happened and where we were going. So anyway, phase one was the executive edict. This is probably familiar to a lot of folks, where there's some kind of open data policy, or in our case, the very first thing was an executive order by then Mayor Newsom in 2009, establishing that we would have an open data program. We were one of the first municipalities to do this. But following that, phase two was actually the publishing scramble. So there weren't any actual resources allocated to this, but there was sort of a mayoral edict, and people scrambled to get this stuff together. The initial open data portal was actually a WordPress site built by our IT department, and that was pretty much the home for open data for about 3-ish years, from 2009, 10, 11, and then starting in 12, they switched over to Socrata. This has all happened before we got into the city. But phase three was this period of stagnation. So this is where essentially after you got everything over the hump, you got all the important data sets out there, a lot of GIS data. Because there were no processes and there's no rationalization about what to prioritize and where the work should happen, it just stagnated. A couple data sets here or there. There was nobody running the show. Phase 4 was the resource reckoning. And this is where Joy and I and our team started to come in. First with Joy. And it was initially basically precipitated by the establishment of an actual policy. So it went from an executive order to an open data policy. In our administrative code, we have Chapter 22D, which lays out that we would have a chief data officer, so it establishes that role. It established the role of data coordinators. It also established the requirement for a data set inventory and some timelines. Once Joy came on, there was still additional resource reckoning that happened. She got me on board, and over time, we built up our staff a little bit. We're about 4 people now. We're rehiring another position. We're about 5 when we're at max staff. And then, so phase 5 is really where we are, and this is sort of an ongoing process. This is not something you just finish, and we're really trying to institutionalize all the work that had happened to date and kind of shore up those processes. So I'll start the next slide really talking about what I mean by institutionalizing an initiative. And the way that this all started was really through, when Joy got here, creating a plan. When she got here, she actually asked, okay, so where's the strategy, where's the plan? And they looked at her and said, well, that's what we hired you for. And so she set out talking to as many people as she could around the city about what they saw open data could do for the city. And I'll give the high points here. One, the first thing is the mission that emerged out of all that talking was that we want to empower use of the city's data. So you'll notice that it's not specifically about open data. And that was purposeful because we realized that what people were struggling with was really around use and impactful use of data across the city, sharing data, getting data. So we wanted to make sure that the mission captured enough of that open data could serve that, but it wouldn't necessarily hem us in. The next thing was a key value shift in that first strategy, which was related to this, really focusing on internal use of open data. So it's still open, but what are the pains that various departments are having? And there are plenty of them. And it's not that we diminished or got rid of the other value propositions around use of external use of data, but it's just that we emphasized this and we really brought it up to we sort of brought this forward. And you heard that in the other two as well. And then we really came out with a strategy that focused on addressing 3 key barriers to data use. And again, we really are looking at data use more broadly. We do this iteratively, but the 3 are knowledge of where data exists, access to the data, and ability to use data to support a broad range of outcomes. So knowledge of if you don't have knowledge of where the data are, then you can't use it. You don't even know what you have until you inventory it. Okay, now you know where it is. If you don't have access to it, then it's still not useful. And then if you have access to it, but you don't have the ability to use it, you can't really. So you really need all 3 in order to really use data meaningfully. There's more on our strategic plans online. There's a link there. But I'm going to move on to really just talking about those 3 barriers and what we're doing, just some highlights. So in terms of knowledge, this is really boils down to our inventory process, but more importantly, the first thing was establishing roles and responsibilities. Data coordinators were codified in our law, but we also make sure that we codified in our own practices the notion of stewards and custodians. And this is really just defining something that people are already doing. Stewards is someone who has a business knowledge of data, and custodians are those who have technical knowledge. Sometimes that's the same person, but really the point was to say, okay, you need to understand the technical and business aspects of managing data. Once those roles and responsibilities were sort of defined, we baked those into our inventory process. So in the inventory process, we had to work with 52 data coordinators, collect various data sets. We provided guidance. We did all the sorts of templates and things that were mentioned earlier. The next point, sorry. Oops. But what we tried to do is through that inventory process is basically bake in stewards and custodians. So you had to identify that through that process. We tried to collect elements that helped prioritize, and basically we only collected the information in the templates that could benefit the program. So we were trying not to collect too much information during that process. just a quick note on the data set inventory. Our data set inventory is mandated by local law. We also publish a systems inventory, and that's mandated by state law, so we do that as well. Finally, even if you have the inventory, things fall through the cracks. You don't log something. So we have a help desk. Folks can ask for help through the portal. We connect people to the coordinators or the stewards. People can suggest data, or they might have questions about data. So that helps. Those three things together help us really address that knowledge barrier. And again, that's an ongoing process. Next barrier around access. Really, for us, our main access point, it's not the only one, but the primary one that we have in our disposal is our portal. But like I said, when we got here, Socrata was already in place. So rather than we did do an assessment, we looked around, but really when we sort of weighed the options of switching or changing over, Socrata met most of the minimum requirements. And rather than try to switch everything, we focused on partnering with them to do UX improvements, and that's ongoing. And then we also did a lot of cleanup of already published data, and then really pushed for leveraging underutilized features on the portal. So when we got here, about 50% of all data was just links to shapefiles. Now 93% of the data on the portal is in the portal. It's stored in the cloud with an API, which increases its utility across the city and with our users. The next thing we did here in terms of addressing access is we reduced the licensing overhead. This was one of the first things we did when we got in, which is there was a crazy licensing or not licensing. So we just standardized everything around public domain and dedication license, a permissive license. We just made that choice once rather than making that a debate every time. And that actually increases the ability for for anyone really to use and remix data without having to worry about sort of attribution stacking and all those sorts of things. And then the big one that we really invested a lot of time was increasing timeliness and usefulness of data. So around here, we really invested time into standardizing our publishing process. You can read a lot more about that on a blog post about our operating manual. And then we built out staging and production automation servers. So one of the missing pieces was people were sort of pushing data, and some people were automating it in the department. We actually centralized that and created a service around automation. So we have a standard process to actually bring in data sets, automate them with the department customer, and we do that, and it helps us sort of scale the program, make sure that we're improving data over time. Finally, around ability, the big things here, folks may have heard of this. We publish a lot on this, but the Data Academy is our biggest sort of anchor program for this. We do this in partnership with our controller's office, the San Francisco controller's office. It's a training program for staff by staff. So we do trainings, our people who work for DataSF, people in our controller's office do trainings, people in HSA, our human services agency, do trainings. So it's a number of folks who do trainings for staff. We do impact surveys, and there's a blog post on this. They estimated about $1.7 million in annual savings just by training people up and leveling up their analytical skills. The other thing that we're doing here is, and this is really part of the academy, which is dashboarding services and related training. So one of the pain points that kept coming up, and everyone would come to our office and say, "Oh my God, I just want to easy report tools. Why can't I just want to easily build these things." So we really did a scan and looked at self-service BI tools. And we settled on Power BI. I can talk about why that's not necessarily the one that you have to settle on, but in our case, it worked for us. And we're developing resources and training around that. And what's great, and one of our requirements was we needed to find something that integrated well with the open data portal. And it's bearing early fruit, because what we're getting is, as we're doing trainings, people are saying, "Oh God, I need to put that data on the portal so I can access it through Power BI and connect it to these things." So it's driving a virtuous cycle. So as you can see, all these things are linked together as sort of a strategic framework. I'm not going to talk to the resource links. These are just there for your reference. But high level, there's the portal. We blog, and we try to share as much as we can. We also have a resource library that includes a bunch of different collections. And then we have a program dashboard where we track how many data sets we're publishing, which departments are publishing, timeliness measures, and those kinds of things. So I'll stop there because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions.
Thanks, Jason. I'm hearing some static on the line. Are others hearing that as well, or is it just me? Okay, let's see.
I think we're hearing that on our line as well.
All right.
Double check that you are muted, everybody.
I just muted it.
I think I found who it was and I muted you. So if that was you, I apologize. Use our chat function to ask questions. Thanks.
Share a link. I think Jason had that in his slides, but there's a link to a great series of blog posts that Jason wrote about operating an open data portal. So I wanted to, we're going to open it up to question and answers now. I wanted to maybe get us started with a couple, and then I'll be quiet as others chime in. Derek has asked a question as well. It sounds like, Jason, it sounds like in contrast to maybe the scenario that that Scottsdale and Gilbert described, there was funding in San Francisco for your program. There was budget support. Is that an accurate assessment? In other words, go ahead, Jason.
Oh, sorry, I was muted sorry. Yes, the short answer is there was budget for certain pieces of it. We did have to essentially make the case for additional resources over time. So that resource reckoning portion was really about, going and saying, this is what we need, a data services engineer, and this is why, and doing the value. So it didn't come for free, so to speak. We did, but the portal was paid for when we got it.
Cool. And so I wanted to follow up with Scottsdale and Gilbert, because you both described in detail about the efforts to do outreach to data users and to get the word out. Some very interesting and innovative techniques for doing that. And I wanted to ask if part of your strategy for doing that was to essentially build support for the program in the absence of budgetary support, or to advocate for budgetary support. How did you see the interplay of those two things?
Yeah, for us in Gilbert, it was just kind of, I think like with most things, anytime you're trying to quote unquote sell something to people, tell them how it benefits them. So here in Gilbert, we looked at, we started with the obvious one, which is that any data that we can put up on the public open data portal will minimize the number of public records requests that we get. So we looked at it in terms of kind of that as the initial selling point, which was, listen, we might actually be able to make your job easier if you put this in there. And if we can get, 10 minutes extra of your workflow to put this stuff out on the open data portal, then maybe that will give you back hours of work, because the more people worked with us, the better opportunities we had to do that automation and to make that stuff. So in terms of like budgets and things, we really just had to sell people on kind of that if we put this info out there, it will benefit them, it will benefit you. And then the budget thing was just kind of something we had to live with. I mean, we really didn't have any ways around that. So I was laughing a little when Jason was giving his presentation, because our Alex site is literally built in WordPress too. And we're just using APIs to kind of send information back and forth, and some JavaScript to pull the data sets onto that site. But it was, everything that we could get for free. And I don't just mean free as in like cost, but even like people's time. Any time that people were willing to give us, I jumped on that. That I feel like that was the only way we were going to get this to work.
That's a great point. I love the story that San Francisco's open data program started on WordPress, and I mean, look where it is now. So I think that's a really great piece of information for folks looking to get started. Brad and Carrie, any thoughts on how?
Yeah.
Outreach?
From an internal perspective, yeah, we did have a struggle at first, really selling this to the organization. People were saying, well, why do we want to put this data out there? And, is it going to just be so that they can question us? And I pulled it around to more of an internal use. And yes, it will be on the open data portal. Not all data will be out there. There's going to be data that we identify that is maybe sensitive. And I think Carrie alluded to some fire data and some probably some medical type data that we would not put out there. And then it was all about evidence-based decision making. That you come up with something, you have the data behind it, you make a change, and you see whether you move the needle or not. And people started getting the light bulbs on there. We're looking for identifying some, I think, strong use cases, and there's been a few. We also use Power BI, so that's highly visual, and people like that. But it's something where you had to kind of get people used to why or what would be in it for them, same as Derek was saying.
Awesome, thanks for that. We have a question. Do any of the cities track the usage of data sets by external sources, like the general public, versus internal uses, like city staff? Any way to track that stuff?
At the city of Scottsdale, we have all that going through Google Analytics, which is a plugin to CCAN, and we did set it up so that we can tell if it's internal or external traffic. I've been in training, so I haven't looked at it this week, but we have seen that we have a pretty steady flow of 200 or 300 clicks a day, every day during the week, and that's all external.
Yeah, this is Jason. We're also tracking using Google Analytics. We have a tricky bit, which is we have a very federated IT environment. So we've gotten our Google Analytics set up mostly to give us this information within reasonable, and it's about 15% of the traffic is coming in from city sources. You run into trouble where like we have a lot of like terminals in the library and other things, so parsing out that across all of our departments gets a little tricky, but we do our best.
Yeah, and we're also using Google Analytics in Gilbert. We don't currently. I mean, we have the ability to see the split between internal and external usage. Just because we launched the Open Data Portal just a few months ago, though, we're not specifically looking at the internal versus external data. I think as long as anybody's using our data right now, I'm happy with it. So once we get more data sets published and we have more stories on there, that's when I'll be really diving into that, because since we have the two separate sites, it's more interesting to me right now to look at who's using just our data site versus who's using Alex.
You know, it sounds like we've got a really interesting blog post about using Google Analytics on your Open Data Portal coming together right on this phone call, right on this office hours. It's happening. Throw in some questions into the chat if you want to ask these awesome folks some questions. I had Derek, you actually posed a question that I thought was a really good one about data policies, and it was to you, Jason. Did San Francisco, do you know, solicit feedback from the broader organization for the open data policy, or was the policy created first and then shared with the rest of the organization?
It's a good question. It's sort of split. The policy was actually amended 2 times. In the second and third time, I believe there was Supervisor Farrell, now our mayor, is solicited feedback through GitHub from the public. Not sure how many folks participated on the city side. I wasn't here then, so there's some vetting, but again, it's a huge city, lots of staff, so. There was some vetting, but it's not like something that everyone had a chance to look at. I think the first policy was pretty much put out, essentially informed by the executive order.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was mainly curious because like with Scottsdale and Gilbert, we had our committees kind of help create that policy. I solicited feedback from that committee, and I think that to Mark's question from earlier, we got a lot more buy-in from departments when they were helping us, figure out what exactly we would commit to and what exactly open data meant, as opposed to us figuring that out and then telling them, hey, you have to do this now because we said so, because it's a policy.
Yeah, so because we came on board and we had inherited the policy, the good thing is we have a governance body called the Committee on Information Technology. We've actually done subsequent policies where we do have lots of engagement. So the nitty-gritty stuff, we're getting a lot of buy-in, and we're using that now that we're here, we have the opportunity to, and I definitely agree, like you get more buy-in that way.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Was somebody going to say something?
Yeah, from Scottsdale's perspective, we basically, we worked with Sunlight and with GovX, and we kind of took what we thought was best of breed to come up with a policy. We then took that to the Open Data Leadership Team, which was a small subset of our leadership team, and got their feedback, and it had HR and legal and public safety, our communications folks. So it was a very wide range of people. And then, as I said earlier in the presentation, we had an administrative regulation associated with this, and all administrative regulations go to the executive team for feedback and input. And I think it was successful for us because I think if we would have started from a blank sheet with that team, we would have had some challenges with just not knowing where to go or what to do. So it helped us to kind of prime the pump and get it going in the right direction. Yeah,
and I just want to sort of follow up on something you said, Brad. You all already know this, but I just want to sort of say it again anyway, because I think the some of the materials and the guidance and the guides that the Center for Government Excellence and Sunlight Foundation have are just awesome, amazing, and take advantage of those, leverage those. We did not have those when I was in Philadelphia, and I'm extremely jealous because they are just phenomenally good. Jason, something you said sparked a thought in my mind about your new mayor. I'm just wondering if any one of the three presenting groups have had to advocate for their program over a mayoral change or a city manager change or some other change in leadership, and maybe some thoughts on how that went or challenges along those lines. Anybody encounter that?
I'll tell you after June. There's an election in June. As folks know, our mayor, Mayor Lee, or you may know, he passed away in December. So that's, been its own sort of challenge. Not something that I thought I'd ever experience in my public service career. But what's happening now, what's great is that we built a lot of trust with folks, and so there's a lot of planning right now happening to sort of make it through that mayoral transition. But most of our operational things are sort of baked in to the budget, to other things. So in as much the part of that institutionalization is really one, serving the value, like actually helping drive value within the organization, helps, I think, weather those storms and those challenges. But we, the sort of the elections in June, and so we'll come out fine on the other side, but we're still sort of actively working through that.
Yeah. All of you mentioned resources that you've created for staff to get them to use the data portal and to publish data, and to use the data that's published on the data portal. And it seems like that's a really effective way to kind of institutionalize this. And I just wanted to know if anybody wanted to expand on that and some of the efforts that you've made to get staff to, as you said, Jason, to sort of bake it in to their daily activities. And that's for anyone. Any of our presenters can jump in on that one if they want to.
I'll jump in, I guess. Jason, so the question was sort of how to align staff value with the open data. Is that basically?
Yeah, I think it is. So how do you institutionalize the practice of both publishing and using open data?
Yeah, and honestly, we have. I mean, I think in every city that's an ongoing fight. We haven't solved that, but I think where we're seeing, because we have so many departments, where it's working really well is when. So right now we've got several initiatives that are leveraging open data sets to do monitoring and tracking. We have a program called Fix It. People go out and identify hotspot areas that need quick fixes, things like fixing streetlights and restripings and things that can be done for sort of quickly without a whole lot of planning process to help improve that neighborhood. And they're using data from the open data portal. It's baked into their process, right? And so I think there's more and more of those. So as that happens, as people are depending on that data being available, it increases their requirements of that's a highly available service and not just an afterthought.
Yeah, I think a good way to do it is to help develop expectations. So if your residents if you can get your staff to help at least initially foster the program enough to where residents then expect to have data available, then that makes it really easy. You know, the whole concept of open data is to hold the government accountable for things. And so the more you can get residents to engage with that, then you know, by extension, hold your staff accountable to that data. I think it just kind of almost is like a reinforcing cycle. So, you know, like with our thing, we're planning on putting Alex everywhere because we want people to have that expectation that if they see that, then there's additional information that they're going to be able to get from our open data portal. And much like with the creation of the policy, if you let departments or staff that are involved in the program set what expectations they're comfortable delivering on, you know, I think that really institutionalizes it because it forces them to do what they said they were going to do, almost, you know.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more? I think we've got time for one more question. I think. Is that right?
I think we do. Yep.
I wanted to ask Brad and Carrie a little bit more about your selection of an open source open data portal, CCAN. And how your experience has been with managing it for however long you've managed it. I assume it's a non-trivial amount of time, and anything you've run into in terms of like maintenance issues or maintenance costs that you might want to surface for others considering going that route.
I would not say that we've encountered specific maintenance costs that weren't anything outside of our normal data center where you can talk to systems engineering and get any server spun up just like any other production and test server. We did at the beginning, because we are a Windows shop.
And this was my direction. This is Brad. I told her to talk about it.
We're a total Windows shop, and this is not a Windows product. However, a few versions ago, there was a person that did go ahead and I call it Windowsize it. So that is the version we're on and how we started. And there was a little bit of trickiness here and there because an error would pop up and you would have to read everything, lines and lines of code, and say 100% of the time it was a slash facing the wrong direction, Windows versus Linux. So once you know, one or two times in, I figured out that was the error. Pretty easy for me to go fix them all. But that's not good for people that are helping you that don't have a Windows and a Linux background where they can interpret that. There's also, you know, when there's no availability to upgrade because the Windows version is only written to a certain release point and that's it. You're done. So we did look at that, had a little instance where we thought maybe it was hacked, turned out it wasn't hacked, but we were like, we want to be able to update every piece of it, the Nginx engine, the Apache engine, and keep them all up to date. So we are going to put it in the cloud and it will be moved to Linux.
And basically a managed Linux platform.
Yes.
So basically that something it's going to be platform as a service.
That's great information. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's going to be super helpful for people that are looking at this. I have a feeling that most, if not all, of the folks on this call are in a Windows environment to some extent anyway.
I don't think it's a bad way to start and feel your way around and know what's going on in CCAN because it's really, really, really stable. I will give it that.
Can I jump on for 2 quick seconds on that? One of the things in our policy that we made a big deal about was that going forward, any kind of RFPs or procurements that we had, that the software that we use has to be platform agnostic. So you have to be able to get that data out from whatever platforms you have. So for exactly this reason, we don't want to have to worry about if it's Windows or Linux or if the software you're using supports it or we can import, export it. So I think that's a good call, is to just make it as agnostic as you can. I know that's not always possible, but
it's a great point. Okay, so I know that we are now just a minute over time. I wanted to thank all of our speakers today and our moderator, Mark Head. This has been a great conversation, and it's jam-packed with a lot of resources that are going to be totally helpful for all of you who are getting started on your own journey or some way along this path. We are going to share the presentation so you can go back through and find all those links for later. We're going to share that both on our website, and then we'll share a recording and a link to where you can find everything that's archived on Slack, but it's also up here on the slide. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. This has been really fabulous. We have 2 more office hours within the next month. Next week, if you join us on the 18th, the Sunlight Foundation is hosting an online workshop called Fresh Ideas to Support Community Use of Open Data, where they're going to be talking about their tactical data engagement work. That's going to be totally fascinating. There's a link in the general channel on Slack. And then later on in the month, or actually in the beginning of May, on May 9th, we are going to have Gilbert, Arizona again, talking about how they're working on communicating with residents. So we're going to hear from the Office of Digital Government and how they're using digital and online engagement to speak to their community, which is going to be really interesting. So I hope that you'll join us all for all of those upcoming events. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you to our speakers and to Mark. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.